church liturgical calendar was being worked out, particularly between 400 to 1000 AD. The church historians realized that in this mystery of Easter, we needed a whole season. If all we did in Easter was celebrate Jesus' rising from the dead, as spectacular as that is, one Sunday would be enough. But what they realized is the mystery of Easter is that Jesus rises from the dead so that he can be raised back to his disciples. Jesus rises from the dead so that in the Spirit, Jesus can be raised back to us today. That he comes back to Lihue Lutheran Church, and we need a lifetime of Easter. And in the promise of a lifetime of Easter, I say grace, mercy, peace. From God our Father, and the rest. During these readings during Easter, a lot of what we look at is how does this living Christ resurrect itself, not just from the dead, but resurrects itself into our lives and into the life of this church. And the gospel reading today is from John. It is a portion of Jesus' farewell discourse to his disciples. He knows that the cross is ahead of him, and so he begins to try to prepare his disciples for their lives without him physically present, but with him resurrectedly present. And Jesus uses the language that would be very familiar to his hearers, common understandings out of the Old Testament. When Moses sees the burning bush and he asks, "What is your name, that I may go back and tell these people which God it is that is calling them out of Egypt?" And you remember that great response, tell them, "I am." And then the gospel writer of John picks that theme up, and 7 times, 4 is the number, you guys have been with me long enough. 4 is the number for the, all right, I can't retire yet. 4 is the number for the earth. 3 is the number for when the earth and heaven come together, you get, there you are. Isn't that wonderful? 7 times in John that God somehow comes into this earth in presence of Jesus. You have these wonderful I am sayings. And you hear, I am the bread, I am the water, the door, the light, the resurrection. But then last week we heard, I am the good shepherd. And then today we hear the last of the I ams. I am the true vine. Last week I confessed, I know nothing about raising sheep. This week I must confess I know even less about growing grapes, except I like an occasional glass of Chablis. That's it. But once again, everyone Jesus said this to, all of his listeners, would understand immediately, because it was as common as getting in your car and going to church. This image of the vine was used by the prophets in Jeremiah, Isaiah, Ezekiel. It's all used throughout the Psalms. It was the image they put on the Hebrew coins, and on the Holy of Holies it was the symbol that connected them to God and God to his people. And as long as this vine was well connected, they knew the grapes would come. And if the grapes came, they knew the wine was be good. And they knew if they had good wine, life was going to be great. And this was this wonderful promise. In Jesus' last I am saying, I am the true vine, he refers that it is his connectedness to this God, and now his connectedness to us, that somehow brings this fullness, richness, completeness of life. When I was a kid growing up, there were only black and white TV sets with rabbit ears and only 3 stations, and you had to get up out of your chair and go manually turn that. Now, who out there doesn't think it's time for me to retire? But I remember as we would watch, as they would go into the commercial, the announcer would always say, "Don't touch that dial." Today, with the internet and webs, they end up saying, "Stay online. Don't log off. Don't let it crash." All of them refer to this sense of this connectedness to Jesus. Stay in this relationship, and the good life is there. One of our missionaries went to an African village, and as he was in the African village, they were so isolated and disconnected from the world. Before he left, he brought a television set. He set the television set in the center of the village where everyone could gather and watch and begin to connect with the entire world around them. They would gather every evening, turn the television on, and watch all the programs and the stories. And after 2 weeks, the chief went up and turned off the television set and unplugged it. And the missionary went in and said, "Why did you turn off the television set?" And he said, "We would rather listen to our storyteller." And the pastor said, "Well, the television knows so many more stories. You can find out so much more." And the chief said, "Yes, but the television doesn't know us. God is the great storyteller. And the wonderful thing about God as our storyteller, He knows you. He knows Lihue Lutheran Church, and God gives you and this church a role in this story. And while there are many characters in this story God is creating, there is only one role for us all, and it is the same role. Love one another as I have loved you. And that role plays itself out in different actions, in different dialogues, and in different ways throughout our island, throughout our lives, throughout this world. And yet the promise is, as we stay connected, as we stay online, abiding in, this faith, this connectedness will continue to pour abundant life into us. And how do we stay connected? Jesus gives us a wonderful clue, and he uses the Greek word kathero. Kathero is literally two meanings. One is to prune, and the other is to cleanse. The pruning and the cleansing. I don't know anything about growing grapes, so I had to go on the internet. See, I can do something. And as I went in there, what was amazing to me was grapevines are extraordinarily aggressive in their ability to grow. And some of the branches grow to over 100 pounds. And as they grow to over 100 pounds, the problem is not that they have wonderful, beautiful vines and branches, but they put all their energy into the branches and not in making grapes. We are not called here to make great branches, but we are called here to bear good fruit. And great branches aren't bad. Wonderful churches aren't bad. Successful careers, making the world a better place, it is not bad. But if it's not done out of the love of Jesus Christ that has been given to you and the love you now have to share, it will be meaningless. And not only is it meaningless, sometimes the weightiness of beautiful branches, instead of giving life, begin to rob us and our energies. And you begin to know when this happens, because Paul lays it out so well for us. He says, what are the fruits of the Spirit? They're love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Those are the byproducts of living in this relationship and bearing good fruit. And as we remain in the love of this Jesus Christ, that fills our lives. But as those things don't fill our lives, then we need to go back and look. Where is this Jesus, and how am I slipping away from him? My grandmother was a seamstress. And as she was a seamstress, I remember her coming, and back then it was all mostly hand sewing. And as she was hand sewing, she would sit in her chair, watch her programs in the afternoon. She loved her program. And as she would do that, she would hum. And she would hum tunes and hymns that she loved. And one of her favorite ones was, "Abide with me, past falls thee." It's a great hymn. But you know, as I think about it, the lyrics are no good. We don't have to ask God to abide with us. Jesus rose from the dead so that in everything, even death, God does abide with us. And his life is here for us. The challenge for us today is, how do we abide with this God? A pastor's wife and her son always, on the way to church, would go by the newsstand. And as they would go by the newsstand, they would always buy a paper. As they would buy a paper, they would always give her the coin, and the pastor's wife would always say, "Thank you very much," and then put in a pleasantry, "Have a good morning," or "I hope you're okay," or whatever ever. And after that, the newspaper man would always just simply go, "Ugh." And after months and months and months of this, finally the little boy said, "Mom, he is so mean, and why do you keep being nice to him?" And she said, "Why should we let him affect who we are? We are God's light, even to him." Abide in the love of God. It already abides in you. And your life and the life of this church is certain.